Hey guys! All I'm going to say about today's chapter reading is things are about to get very real and very heated. I also have a surprise bonus at the very end, so stick around for that. Let's just go ahead and get right into today's chapter reading. Chapter 24. One day in the winter of 1868 to 69, Brigham called a meeting of the men of the high priesthood of the church. T. Whitaker attended. It was very late that night when he got home. He came to bed quietly, but I was awake. "What made you so late?" I asked. He turned toward me in the bed and took me in his arms. He pressed his cheek against mine with his lips close to my ear and whispered, "Lizzie, I love you more than you can ever know. Do you believe me?" "Yes, I believe you." "Do you love me?" "Yes." "Let me hear you say the words, please, dearest." "I hope and pray that I have made you love me. I have tried all these years since our marriage, and I need your love more now than you can possibly realize. Say it once more." "I do love you," I whispered back, and it came from my heart, unsuspecting and in full trust of his love for me. I was in my 7th month with our 6th child. I didn't know just what to make of his question this late at night, and I knew he was not expecting to make love to me physically. He had always been most considerate in that way, as in all others. He was always so clean. Though most folks then bathed about once a week, he bathed every single day. All we had was a round tin tub for laundry. He didn't use a great deal of water, and he always cleaned up after himself. It wasn't hard to love such a man. I think it would have been harder not to. His next words brought me back to reality with a shock. "Dear Lizzie, a long time ago, when first I asked you to marry me, I gave you a promise that I now must break. I want your consent before I go on. Will you give in?" "What is it?" I choked, fear and dismay clutching at my heart. Tonight at the meeting I went to, Brigham talked to us men, telling us that there were far more converts coming into the church now. Many of them are young girls in their late teens, leaving home and family and crossing the ocean and being deserted by their kinfolk for joining the church. They have no means of support, no one to look after them. There are far less eligible men in the church now than women. He said words to this effect. These young women have a right to a husband and a family. They may never see that fulfillment unless you men are willing, each one of you who is able, to take one to wife and give her a chance to be a wife and a mother and rear a family of Latter-day Saints unto the Lord. Lizzie, I feel duty-bound to take another wife as the Lord's prophet has commanded. Even now, after all these years, I cannot ever describe to you the turmoil, the anguish, the fierce anger and frustration that surged through my whole soul as he spoke those words to me. I pulled myself from his embrace and jumped out of bed, trembling from head to foot as I cried, "But you gave me your solemn word of honor as a gentleman that you would never marry in polygamy if I married you." I began to sob uncontrollably. "I hate you. I'll never so long as I live give my consent, neither now nor in the hereafter, so there." He was out of bed like lightning and picked me up forcibly, holding my struggling body, trying to quiet me. "Hush, hush, you'll wake the children," he pleaded. "Do you think I care? Traitor! I felt sure I could trust you. I hate you. You're just like all the other dang polygamists. I hate you. I'll take my children and run away from you. I won't live in polygamy. I won't." I became hysterical. For the first time in my life, I could not stop crying and berating him. I completely lost control of myself for the first time in my life. Suddenly, his voice became stern and commanding, a voice I had never heard from him before. "You're acting like a spoiled child, my dear. Now stop this business and quiet down, or you'll bring on your confinement before your time." I was still struggling to free myself, but he was strong as an ox and held me fast. Then he went on in a kindlier tone. "There is no one on earth who could make me break my word to you. But the word of the Lord is above all earthly matters, and in my heart I feel I must break my promise to you in order to fulfill his command. Now be quiet and rest. You are a great and a strong woman, my dear. You will one day come to see that this has to be. I will never love you less because I have another wife. She can never take your place. You will always be my first in my heart of hearts. I'll never give you up. You know that. He laid my quivering body back on the bed and drew the covers gently up around me. I lay there the rest of the night, sobbing to myself and fighting to gain my self-control. But this was such a dreadful, totally unexpected shock. I never once dreamed he'd do this to me. It was too much. I must think of something, but what? There was really not a thing I could do. Something in his voice told me his mind was made up. I was helpless, and I hated it. Annie got breakfast that morning, and he was up and gone when I finally got up and dressed myself. I did not speak to him when he came home in the evening, and the next day he left to go to work in Ogden and was gone for 2 weeks. This gave me time to get myself together again and to take care of my daily duties as usual. But the children, especially Annie, Will, and Sam, could see that something awful had happened as I was crying and impatient with them. But they asked no questions, and I told them nothing. Let him tell them. It was his doings, not mine. But in confidence, I told Mary. She was sympathetic, but she couldn't quite grasp why I was so adverse to polygamy, and I couldn't make her understand. Finally, when he came home, he was in his own cheerful self, and, as always, the children were so happy to see him. But I was still unrelenting. I scarcely spoke to him, only when I had to. I felt so betrayed, so let down, so desperately sick inside. I just wanted to die. He attributed part of my behavior to my condition. He was gentle, kind, and considerate as always, and never raised his voice to me except once, when his patience seemed to give out, and he spoke rather sharply. "Lizzie, I'm really disappointed in your conduct. In your constant fussing and fuming, you're acting for all the world just like an old setting hen." "Yes," I retorted, "and I feel like one." But he went right on with his plan to take another wife. It was the custom then for the first wife, everyone thought I was his first wife, to go to the endowment house or the president's office, wherever the plural marriage was to be performed, to show her willingness and give her consent to the union by taking the hand of the new bride-to-be and place it into the hand of her husband. When the time came, he said to me, "Will you go with me and put her hand in mine? I want this so very much. I will be so happy if you will go and do this." "No, I will not." "But Lizzie, what will I say to Brigham when he asks why you are not there?" "I don't care. I don't care a dang what you say, but you just might tell him the truth, that I would not come." The woman he chose was named Hannah. She was no teenager either. She was past 22 years old. An English girl from a large family of converts. They were poor, just like the rest of us, but she wasn't here alone without family or friends. As I said, she had her whole family. But that's the one he chose. They were from Warwickshire, England. She was small and dainty, with rather plain features and very dark brown eyes. The first time I ever saw her was after they were married. He brought her home to our big house in Centerville. Well, there was nothing I could do but take her in and let her stay. So I gave up the big living room to her, and we both used the same kitchen. I glared at her, but spoke not a word. She glared back and was silent also. T.W. was away in Ogden when my new baby arrived. Grandmother Brown delivered him. I told her what he'd say about my being an old setting hen. She was most sympathetic and seemed to know just how I felt. But when he came home next day after the baby was born, a fine big 8-pound boy, she picked up the child and held him out toward his father, saying, "Pretty good for an old settin' hen, don't you think?" We named the boy Joseph James, and so life went on. I didn't die, though I wished I could. I felt I'd rather be dead than live in polygamy. It was so much harder now to live with another woman in the house. I hated it, and I'm sure she did too. At first, I made no attempt whatsoever to be friends with her. She must have been lonely there, alone all day in that big room with no one to talk to. But I didn't think of that then. All I could think of was how sick I felt about the whole thing, and the way it had disrupted, nay, actually destroyed my whole life. But I planted my little vegetable garden and carried on the best I could that summer. She became pregnant at once, but miscarried that first time. I had to nurse her, and I did. But without the love and compassion I'd had for others I'd cared for. To me, she was an intruder, and I could not change my feelings toward her overnight. She had no love for me either, and I don't blame her. So we lived on in silent antagonism. Even now, if I had it to do over again, I don't think I could be any different. She went full-time with her next pregnancy, and her child, a little girl, was born May 6, 1870. I nursed her then, too, to save paying out money, which we really didn't have. It was a real struggle feeding so many mouths, even though T.W. worked most of the time. Most of his work was in Ogden, and finally he got a room there, and sometimes he'd take Annie with him to do the cooking and keep house for a week, or even 2 weeks at a time. They named the baby Elizabeth Ann, a really pretty child with dark eyes and hair. Her next child was also a girl, born August 2nd, 1872. They named her Mary Jane, also a very pretty child, dark eyes and hair like the first. We 4 old friends, Mary, Millie, Grandmother Brown, and I, got together as often as we could, and after the first year I could laugh again and find some enjoyment in life with my children and my friends. Then, one day, we had a party at my house. I had a nice plump chicken, so I hung out my white tablecloth as the signal to the other 3 to come. We had such a good time all afternoon after our dinner. The others had brought food to go with the chicken. We laughed and visited, told jokes, just really enjoyed ourselves, with never a thought of Hannah alone in her big room. She sat there, not hearing a word that was said, but hearing the laughter and merriment. When T.W. came home that night, she was in tears. He asked her what the matter was, and she told him that we had a party, and that we'd sat and talked about her and laughed at her the whole time. He came to me and confronted me with this bit of news. I was so angry that I ordered him to come back into her quarters with me, and I confronted her. Now, I said to her, "You tell me to my face just one sentence you heard us speak concerning you." She burst into tears, crying piteously. "Speak up," I ordered. "What did you hear? Just one word." More sobs from her, but no words came. "You lied to him about me, didn't you?" I exclaimed calmly, but fuming within. "Even if you'd heard every word we spoke, you couldn't have heard a word about yourself, for the simple reason that your name was never mentioned, nor even thought of. We had far more important things to discuss than you." She went on crying, and I turned and walked out of the room, back into my own part of the house, leaving them alone together. Afterward, he told me she had confessed that she had heard nothing but our happy voices and laughter, and that she was so lonely and felt left out, and that she truly thought we must be talking about her and laughing at her. This incident further widened the breach between her and me, if that were possible. Then later on, in the summer, I saw her go out into my garden that I had planted and cared for, with no help from her whatsoever in weeding, watering, tending it constantly and carefully, and she was helping herself to my few precious carrots. To me, this was a crowning insult. Why, if she wanted garden stuff, did she not plant her own? There was ground and to spare, and she had no more work than I did, nor so much even. I ordered her out of there and gave her a wild threat that she was never to try that trick again. When T.W. came home, I said to him, "Either you get that woman out of this house, or I will not be responsible for what happens between us. You tell her to stay out of my garden and out of my way. I'll live like this no longer, understand?" He knew I meant it, and he promised to build her a house as quick as he could. He did, about 2 blocks east of the big house. So finally I had my home back again, and she had 1 large rock room, where he later added on to make 3 rooms. What became of the silkworms? I asked. When I turned the big room where we kept them over to her, she had the care of them. She didn't care for them properly, and they all died. In a way, I was glad. They had a peculiar odor, sickly sweet, yet to me offensive, and I didn't encourage him to continue the raising of them. Well, I went right on having children. Josephine was my 7th Whittaker baby. She was born November 1st, 1871. Such a pretty little girl, fair, like Emmy, with golden hair, but entirely different build and features. None of my children looked alike. They were as different as though they had been born of entirely different parents. After Josephine, I had another miscarriage, but soon after I recovered. I became pregnant again, and Sarah Aveline, my 8th child, was born January 1st, 1874. Oh, she was a beauty right from the first. Bright copper-colored hair, lots of it, just the color of a brand new penny, and large deep blue eyes, peaches and cream complexion. A breaker of hearts she was, but too proud and haughty for her own good. I guess she got that from me. Really, an entire book could be written about the lives of my children, their growing up, their love affairs and marriages, if only one could do it all. T.W. began taking the 2 older boys, Will and Sam, with him to Ogden to work when they weren't in school. He taught them the carpenter and cabinet-making trade, and they both became excellent carpenters. Sam went on to become a skilled architect. He drew the plans and supervised and helped with the building of the Ogden Tabernacle. It is still there as of now. I don't recall just what year, but it was after Hannah moved into her own house and had several children that T.W. got a letter from his former wife, Mary Ann Church. She stated that even though she had obtained a divorce from him in New Zealand, she found it was not acceptable in the United States, and that she was coming to Salt Lake City to see him. She came and took up residence in what is now the Hotel Utah in Salt Lake. She made a trip out to Centerville and came to my house to see him. She said she was going to marry a very rich man and must get the divorce finalized and valid first. I liked her at once. She was a very shrewd, fine-looking woman, rather heavy-set, expensively and well-dressed, had plenty of money, and was good company. She invited me to go to Salt Lake and spend the night with her in her hotel room. I jumped at the chance. She hired a rig to take me and bring me back. I packed my nightgown in the big purse I had knitted for myself, gave instructions to Annie to look after the children, and away I went. Oh, what a good time I had! She took me to the ZCMI store and bought me a beautiful ready-made dress, royal blue of fine spun wool, the only one I'd ever had that I hadn't made myself. She asked me how I like polygamy. I hate it, I answered. When you have loved and lost one husband, then married and learned to love another, and found real happiness once again, and then he takes another wife and brings her into your home, where you must nurse her when confined, how can you say, "Thy will be done"? I tell you it's hell. I think I understand, but why did you put up with it? I had no choice. To me, it's no more than a business proposition in most cases, especially among the very poor. Almost like being bought and sold like a slave, only there wasn't any money paid out by the owner. Many old codgers joined the church just so they could have more wives, especially young girls. Oh yes, they were all after the young girls, virgins. They'd marry them, get them pregnant, tire of them, and often some would then run off and leave them. Mrs. Moore's husband was one such, as she told me herself. Tell me about it. I'm most interested to hear about this new religion. Surely your husband isn't that type. He's a very fine, high-principled man, as I know from personal experience. No, he isn't that type, but it hurts just the same. Oh, how it hurts. I've seen those hungry-eyed men spot a pretty young girl and ask her to marry him even before he knew her name or she his. I see you are very bitter about it. I really don't blame you. You're surely beautiful and capable enough in every respect to satisfy any man. To tell you the truth, I can't understand why he'd go after another woman. Is she ravishingly beautiful, clever, rich? All three, perhaps? I'm not going to describe her to you. If you want to know, you must meet her for yourself. I can tell you this, there is no love lost between her and me. She dislikes me every bit as much as I dislike her. But I'm sure I'd dislike any woman who took my husband from me. He married her because the president of the church asked every able-bodied man who was in good standing in the church to take an extra wife because there weren't enough young unmarried men to go around. There are more young women converts than men. But as I understand it, she was not alone here. She comes from a large family, isn't that so? If you brought me down here to find out all the particulars of his polygamous marriage, I have no more to say concerning it. You must ask him or her. Elizabeth, I'm truly sorry. I didn't mean to sound so inquisitive. But I loved him too, once, and I'm deeply interested in him, his life out here in Utah, and the Mormons. You know, he tried to convert me to Mormonism, but it was too strict for me. That's why I left him. I got a divorce, but they tell me it isn't legal, so I'm here to get another. Or his signature for one in California, so I can remarry. Yes, I understand, but let's talk about something else. Polygamy isn't my favorite subject. Sorry, really I am. But I'll make it up to you. I really like you a lot. Should you ever come to California, San Francisco, do look me up and I'll show you around. You'd love it, I'm sure. I laughed. Fat chance I'll ever have a chance like that. If I go to Salt Lake, I walk. We have so very little money. He has 2 families to spend it on. I raise my own vegetables. But thanks anyway, and I want you to know that I like you too, a lot. You have shown me a really good time and are a very fine person. She stayed about 6 weeks in Salt Lake and seemed to get a real kick out of her visit. When I got home, I told Hannah, we were on speaking terms by then, that I'd met her and that she said she'd like to meet TW's other wife. Wouldn't you like to meet her, I asked, thinking she really might want to. I'd like to shoot her, she snapped. Well, I don't think they ever met. Mary Ann went back to San Francisco and I never saw her afterward. But she sent me a beautiful piece of material to make myself a whole outfit. And I did. It was the best thing I ever had to wear. And that's it for today's reading. So I have to say, if there are any of Hannah's descendants who are watching these videos, I would love to hear your comments down below. If there's anything that you'd like to share to add to this, I'd love to hear. I'd love to hear about any oral histories or journal entries where Hannah might have talked about her experience with Sarah, whom we call Elizabeth. And for everybody else watching this, just so you know, in the final documentary that I'm putting together to add to the story, once we're finished with the book, I'm going to show pictures and photos and all kinds of things to put a face with all of these people that you've come to know from this book. So stay tuned for that. It's going to make everything seem even that much more real, and we're going to get some other perspectives. So can't wait to put that out, but I would love to hear from any of Hannah's descendants. So reach out to me if you have anything you'd like to share to add to this. As a bonus surprise in today's reading, I'm going to show you for the first time ever a photograph of Thomas Whitaker and his second wife, Hannah, as well as his very first wife, Mary Ann Church. So here they are. Here's Mary Ann Church, who came to visit from San Francisco. Here's Thomas, and here is Hannah. And there are 4 pictures of Elizabeth, who goes by Sarah in the story. Well, we only have 5 more chapters left, and then I will put out the documentary. In the next couple of weeks, we're going to be ordering the tombstone, and then I'm going to reach out to those of you who donated so you can be a part of that graveside tribute. Hope you enjoyed today's reading, and I will see you next week for chapter 25.